Updating your camera firmware is one of those essential tasks that you need to do to keep your camera in tip-top shape. Yet a lot of photographers don't do this because they're either intimidated by the process or they think it's just a lot more complex than it really is. In this short video, we're going to look at the two methods to update your firmware in Fujifilm cameras. So why should you even update your firmware? Well, there's a few good reasons why. And for one, Fujifilm is known for introducing new technology via firmware instead of releasing a new camera. So that means that as autofocus technology improves and they can make autofocus faster and more precise, you don't have to wait until the next camera comes out to get that technology. They'll push it to you in a firmware update where you can install that technology on the current camera that you already have. Another reason is to address bug fixes. Now, fortunately, this doesn't happen a lot because Fujifilm cameras and other camera manufacturers in general usually do a pretty good job of releasing technology that's been vetted so that they don't have these bugs. But every now and then, one slips through the cracks, and you'll want to make sure that you keep your firmware update to address this. And then finally, the third reason to keep your firmware updated is to make sure your camera is compatible with new lenses as new lenses come out. Now, there are two ways to update your firmware in Fujifilm cameras, and the first that we'll talk about is via an SD card. And this is going to work for all Fujifilm camera models and is what you'll have to do for cameras that do not have a Bluetooth connection. The other way is via the Bluetooth connection and the Fujifilm smartphone app, which, as you would expect, is only available for newer cameras that have that Bluetooth technology. To check to see if you need to update your firmware, hold the display back button while you turn on the power. And when you do that, you're going to see a screen that's going to show the current firmware version of both your camera body and your lens. Next, you're going to want to go to Fujifilm's firmware update page, which I'll have linked in the notes for this video, and check the firmware that was listed in your camera body and your lens. Check that against the current list on Fujifilm's website. If it's been a while since you've updated your camera firmware, or this is the first time that you've done it, you can be pretty sure that if you see a new next to your camera body model or lens model, then you're going to have to update your firmware. The first thing that you're going to need to do when updating via an SD card is to make sure that you're using a formatted SD card, and this is going to prevent any kind of wonky things from happening when you're doing the update. So pop that memory card into your memory slot, go to the User Setup menu and select Format. Just know that this is going to erase anything that's on that card, so make sure that if it's photos, you're going to have a backup of those first. The next thing you need to do is go to that camera model from the Fujifilm firmware update page and download the firmware. Read through the license agreement if you want to, but make sure you check on that agreement box and then download it somewhere on your computer where you can find it easily. Then go to wherever you saved that .dat file and transfer that over to that memory card that you just formatted. Once that file transfer is complete, pop that memory card into your camera with the power off. And now when you turn that camera back on, making sure that you have a charged battery, we're going to do the same thing that we did when we checked for the current firmware update. Hold the display back button while turning the power on. When that firmware update screen comes up, the camera is going to detect that you have a firmware update on that memory card. So it's going to ask you if you want to update either your camera body or your lens. Go ahead and highlight the appropriate thing that you want to update there and press OK, and then you're going to verify it once more on the following screen. You'll see the little status bar as the firmware is updating. Make sure that you don't touch anything on the camera. I just recommend putting it down and letting it do its thing, because if you accidentally hit the power or open the battery cover or anything like that, it may ruin the camera forever. So just leave it alone and And when it's done updating, it'll tell you and let you know that it's got the current firmware on there. The other method requires Bluetooth-enabled cameras and the smartphone app. So when you turn your camera on and you open the smartphone app and the app connects to your camera, it's going to automatically check to see if there's a new firmware update available. And if there is, it'll tell you and ask you if you want to go ahead with the firmware update. Just go ahead and tap on yes. Tap download to download that firmware update file. It's going to ask you to agree to the license agreement, and then it will download that file to your smartphone. Once it's all downloaded, go ahead and tap on update. Your camera screen is going to ask you if you want to update firmware from your smartphone. Go ahead and press OK. And then the camera is going to enable the Wi-Fi connection to more rapidly transfer that firmware update file from the smartphone to the camera. So you'll go back to your smartphone, join the Wi-Fi connection once it's enabled on the camera, and that file is going to be transferred over. And then once your camera has downloaded the file, the rest of it's going to be automatic and the same as when you update via an SD card. You're just going to see that progress bar, do not touch the camera, and when it's done updating, it'll let you know. And that's it. Now your camera is equipped with the most current technology out of Fujifilm for that camera, and in theory, all bug fixes addressed.